Welcome to the Block and Tackle Show, hosted by Karl Block. Karl is a partner in the law firm of Loeb & Loeb here in Los Angeles, California. He will be tackling some of the biggest issues in business today. Listen, learn, and enjoy as he leaves no stone unturned during deep conversations with some of today's most amazing business leaders. Welcome to the show.
Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Block and Tackle Show. Today, I have on a very interesting and very distinguished guest, Neil Keegan. Neil is in an undisclosed location at some place, I believe, near Annapolis, which is not surprising since he spent some of his formidable years at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. And he also has a great story about his background. And we're going to unpack all of that and what he's doing today and his thoughts on AI and technology and the defense industry. But welcome to the show, Neil.
Great. Thank you so much, Karl. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's great. So first, we're going to talk about the story of young Neil growing up in Southern Maryland, and with a passion for that little game that I think the Native Americans or Native Canadians invented, and which sort of dictated a little bit of his early life. And you know what's going to happen now, Neil, because I'm going to let you talk about where you went, where you did your undergrad. All the Hopkins people watching this are going to be like, Karl, you did not have a guy who plays lacrosse from that other school on your podcast. Now you owe us. Now you're going to have this whole stream of people who played Hopkins lacrosse on to make it even. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about your background. So you are that high school kid, and you have a gift for that sport, which is called
lacrosse.
Yes. And you're pretty darn good, aren't you?
I wouldn't call it a gift. I think I was an early adopter. So I actually grew up in Northern Virginia, and there weren't that many places that were playing lacrosse there. So I started off on a youth league, and in part chose my high school, a Catholic all boys school in Alexandria, because they had lacrosse and they were actually pretty good. And we would continually play some of the better private schools in the DC, Maryland area. We'd go down to Virginia. We'd play teams from New York. So I was able to get in early in a growth phase of the sport, and was a reasonably good athlete, and found my way to Navy. But part of that choice was that I knew that I wanted to play for Navy, and wasn't a highly recruited guy, but I wanted to put the time in and give myself the best shot to get to Navy and to step out on the field in the blue and gold.
So you go to the Naval Academy, Neil. Probably something that requires a lot of dedication, discipline, maybe craziness, and
all the above. Absolutely.
And you play a sport that Navy historically has been a great power for. So must have been a lot of pressure there too. But did you love the Naval Academy?
Well, they say it's a very expensive education shoved up your where, a nickel at a time. So there was a lot of fun things about it, a lot of difficult things about it. I absolutely loved the fact that I went there and had those incredible experiences, and some of the best friends of my life came from my time there and my time in the Navy. I wouldn't change it at all. But being a 19, 20-year-old young red-blooded male in a place that was very constrained and very constricted was oftentimes a little bit of a challenge for me.
I'm sure. And my guess is back then there weren't a lot of women in the Naval Academy either. Is that a fair assumption?
Fair. So I came into my plebe year in 1990, and I graduated in 1994. And if memory serves, the first incoming class of females was 1976, and the graduating class of 1980. So it hadn't really been that long. I want to say we were maybe 12 or 13% female. And what's really been interesting, because I'm still close to the Naval Academy, is that the academy has really grown and progressed, and I think has done a nice job of being a lot more inclusive for not only women but for other folks. I think women make up about 35, 36% now, and it's a really impressive group of young people. And for example, I was just recently invited to what's called a dining out, which is a pretty rare occurrence where a company, and there are 36 companies at the academy, they will, at the end of the year, they'll go out and do kind of a fun evening out where they've got acts and skits and videos, and they really have a lot of fun with each other. But the young people that I met are just really, really special. I mean, they are super smart, super motivated from all walks of life. And, you know, being there gave me, really good hope, for the country, because there are still a lot of young, smart, aggressive, just awesome young people that believe in the mission and believe in the country.
That's great. And for those people who don't know, who've never come across people that go to the service academies, you can't just be an amazing athlete, or you can't just be somebody who has 4.0s and great board scores. You have to be a pretty well-rounded person, and you need a recommendation, don't you, from a congressional representative.
Correct.
So it does take a special person to actually want to go there and have the overall well-rounded nature and desire and civic mindedness. Frankly, people don't always really think of the military as being civic minded, but a lot of people who go to the Naval Academy or the other service academies end up in public service, even if it's not in the military, right?
No, 100%, and that's really laid out from the very beginning that this is all about giving back to your country, being a person of service, in the military, in the regular civilian world, or giving back ultimately in politics. So thankfully, there's a lot of academy grads, and not just Naval Academy, but West Point and Air Force and Coast Guard, where they have a lot of student military leaders that come out and go on to great success in all of these disciplines. And I think the academies are a really special place, for that breeding ground of this well-rounded leadership talent for young people.
That makes a heck of a lot of sense. So, like all people who graduate from the Naval Academy, you have to do your compulsory service. So, what'd you choose to do after you got out?
So I chose surface warfare. So the acronym is SWO, or SWO, which makes up the bulk of the graduates from the Naval Academy. And generally, when you graduate, you become either an ensign in the Navy, or you go in the Marine Corps and you're a second lieutenant. But out of the Navy, there's lots of things you can do. You can go to flight school, Navy SEALs, submarines, or surface warfare. But the bulk of the graduates end up going into the regular Navy. So we're on ships. And I like to think of it a little bit like the movie Greyhound with Tom Hanks. That was kind of like our Top Gun for surface warfare officers. So uh, not quite as cool as being a pilot or a Navy SEAL, but I like to call it the real Navy. And I had some great experiences and adventures in the Navy.
I want to say, since you mentioned that, and not to make a plug for Apple, that movie is amazing.
Amazing, amazing.
And I believe there's been some talk about a sequel, and I keep wondering if it's going to happen. Hanks was amazing. That movie was amazing. Showing the humanity of the officer corps and the rest of the sailors, ridiculously amazing and great movie. So,
Well, and not only that, but he was incredibly technically proficient. So
mhm.
if you watch how he handled the ship, his ship commands and helmsmanship, just so spot on. That's what I did. I would drive my ship, not quite as adeptly as Commander Hanks, but that he nailed it. He really did.
I thought it was excellent. So you started out as an ensign on a ship, frigate, destroyer. What'd you do?
So I was very fortunate, and I have to thank you and a lot of our listeners for our tax dollars at work. So they sent this young ensign off to Italy. Uh,
Uh,
I was on the admiral's flagship for the Sixth Fleet. I was part of ship's company, and I was an engineering officer for 2 years.
mhm.
And what was interesting about this ship, the USS LaSalle, is that the main mission was projecting our power and command and control for the whole Sixth Fleet, but also to do diplomatic port visits. So being a 23, 24-year-old ensign in a lot better shape, with a lot more hair, we would literally leave Italy, and then we'd go to Monaco, then we'd go to Barcelona, and then we'd go to Malta, all within a month. We'd throw these parties on board and get to stay in these unbelievable ports for a few days, and then I'd come back to Italy. And on weekends, I'd go to Tuscany or go up to Milan. So it was really a great, terrific experience for me as a young ensign.
What do you think in terms of leadership and teamwork were, the most interesting or important memories you have, and what ultimately, because you obviously, like anything, maybe to some degree more so when you're in an academy, what you learn in college versus your, putting your toe in the water in the real world. What do you take from that?
So it's funny you ask because I've just been reflecting on this a little bit more recently, and it's funny how the simple things really matter. So when you're on a sports team, you're relying on everybody else on the team to do their job, and if the team and the individuals do your job, your chances of success go up. Well, the Navy really is really one big team sport. So you're learning your skill and your job, and you have to do your job, and you do it well, and you also have to do it to the point where you have to have the confidence that the sailors or other officers to your right and left, they're doing their job too, because you can't worry about doing their job for them. So it kind of ends up being this well-oiled machine. And when you do an evolution out at sea, such as underway replenishment, or you're launching or landing aircraft, or you're doing live fire exercises, everyone's got to do their job, or people are going to get hurt or killed. And that's an everyday evolution. I'm not even talking about a combat situation. So learning the little things, showing up on time or being early, doing your job, being focused, being trustworthy. If you don't know the answer, say so, but find out quickly. All these little things that were hammered into us at the Naval Academy and out in the Navy, I found them to be incredibly powerful, and just executing on the business front every day, day in and day out, just executing the simple things well. And I think if you can do that, in general, you're going to be ahead of the competition, because not everybody does that, and not every team does that.
No, and man, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But boy, have I seen that so many times. So you are Admiral Royalty on the flagship. You're doing the diplomatic stuff as best as you can, projecting Navy might and diplomacy and elegance and the U.S. And then at some point, you get the bug to go to the dark side as far as the Naval Academy is, and you decide to go to Hopkins, and you decide, okay, so who is Navy's most bitter lacrosse rival? Let me think about this. Who's 30 miles up the road? Johns Hopkins, or in the case of SICE, a few miles away. So you decide to be a Hopkins man. So
Well, that should make a lot of your friends and listeners happy.
yeah, some of them, yeah, definitely for sure. So, what made you decide to go to the School of Advanced International Studies?
So a lot of it was really informed by my time, in Italy, and after that tour in Italy, I was the navigator on an amphibious warship out of San Diego, and from there did a Persian Gulf deployment. So saw that, Asia and that part of the world, Middle East, and as I was going through that evolution, I was thinking, wow, it's a big world out there. It's so interesting, so complex, and I was getting The Economist, sent to me in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and my fellow officers like, "What are you doing that for?" I'm like, "Ah, it's just interesting." So I'd read The Economist once a week and try to get up to speed in learning about what else was out there, what else I could be doing. And I ended up taking my last assignment back at Navy as a leadership instructor and offshore sailing coach, because I wanted to have that ability to be in the DC area, think about my transition, and how I could have a good bridge from my time in the Navy to my time in the business world. But I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. So Johns Hopkins SICE was an interesting choice for me, because you could do a lot of things at a high level coming out of a place like SICE. And it was just, intellectually very interesting. They had a great program in economics, in finance, in understanding emerging markets and how these economies worked, from a political perspective as well as an economic and financial perspective. They had just brought on a great professor from Wharton, who really brought the Wharton finance repertoire into SICE. So I just thought it'd be a really neat combination. And after being at Navy, where you might have 20 hours of work a night and 3 hours to do it, which was really just triage, especially for me, going to a place like SICE where I could really immerse and really feel like I could dig in and learn and just enjoy learning things that I was curious about. It was just a great fit for me.
Well, that's great. And then I guess you survived SICE. And then how'd you decide on what your next move was?
So some of it was a little process of elimination. So being in the Navy and having these ideas of grandeur, like, oh, I'd love to go be a high-end consultant at one of these big firms, or maybe I'll go work for the president, or maybe I'll go work for the World Bank, or maybe I'll go be a lawyer at a top firm, or go be an investment banker at a huge bulge bracket. So I literally had all these ideas of things that I wanted to do, but then pretty quickly realized you better start crossing things off the list and focusing in, or you're not going to work at a high level at anything. So I pretty quickly fine tuned on finance and realized that my best opportunity to go work up on Wall Street in New York at one of the top firms was to focus in, to network, and to go up and do an internship between my first and second year of graduate school. And I was fortunate to get an internship over the summer. It was the summer of '01. So you might recall that this was right after the dot-com crash. So the equity markets were falling apart. I had this, call it, naive idea that I would work in emerging markets, emerging market equities, or fixed income trading, and there was just nothing happening. There was no job for that. So you got to kind of wise up, and you got to figure out where you need to go, and where the opportunities are, and where the firm is growing and profitable. So out of 50 summer associates, there were only about 10 jobs to be had. So I pretty quickly zoned in on, I need to get a job and I want to work at this firm. So then you go through that process to land that spot.
Understood. And what lessons did you take away from working on Wall Street, other than the fact that you ran into Hopkins people all the time working there? What lessons do you think you learned that helped you today?
Wow. So it's funny, this teamwork aspect seems to be a recurring theme in my life, and I was fortunate to work at a at a super high quality, um, long standing, marquee firm where I learned a lot about the culture of a bank, of working with people, of working very closely with the clients, putting the clients first, working incredibly hard, being very precise, not making mistakes. But if you did make a mistake, don't make the same mistake twice. Um, I was looking back, probably a little more naive, thinking that, hey, I'm a Navy guy, and if I put my head down and work hard and do the right thing, I'll continue to progress and make the big bonuses. There is an aspect of that, but the political maneuvering and wrangling and all of that was a little bit lost on me at an earlier stage. And had I played that game better, I probably would have ended up in different roles with different levels of responsibility, and had different conversations at year end around bonus time. So that also kind of colored my vision on where I wanted to go next and what I wanted to do. That type of atmosphere wasn't necessarily, my cup of tea, and I didn't want to spend 20 or 30 years doing that.
Fair enough. And then was the next stop the family office investing stuff? And how'd you get into that?
So it was, again, an evolution. So I was in New York for a number of years working in one part of the firm, and I wanted to be closer to the investment side of the firm. So I made a move from New York to Los Angeles and joined our group that focused on private clients. And one of my clients, had the good fortune of selling his business, excuse me, in 2006. They became a client. They work with a lot of different firms. So ended up working in the private client group. One of my clients sold their business, and I had the opportunity in the financial crisis to go work directly with the family, and it was an incredible opportunity to work directly with a very interesting entrepreneur who had a lot of success, unbelievable business acumen, and I had the opportunity to really help them build out the whole portfolio, manage the portfolio, but also create a family office investment structure. So I did that for about 10 years. We had a heavy skew towards alternative investments and direct investments. And one of the investments that we made was in a company called SpaceX about 10 years ago. And that's where the light bulb really went off for me in terms of what would ultimately become Marlinspike, the firm I'm running now with my partners.
I have to tell you something. So I have a podcast up right now with a guy named Rich Hull. who talked about how when he got into his venture investing, mostly in an entertainment, um, one of his biggest investments was SpaceX. So now I could be having the SpaceX fraternity or the
There you go.
sorority group on about how investing in SpaceX launched their careers. So okay, so you invested in SpaceX, and it gave you the bug to do more science, technology, and maybe defense investing.
Yeah, correct. So the investing that we're doing now at Marlinspike, it's technically aerospace and defense technology investing, but we like to call it dual use. So I use that term because the companies that we invest in have a dual purpose. One is to solve a challenge and create a product or service that can help on the national security front, for the U.S. and our allies, but also can have wide commercial adoption and scalability.
And
So,
we're gonna unpack that in just a sec, and that's really good, by the way. But so when do you make the jump to start Marlinspike, and how do you start it?
so I had been with the family about 10 years
Uh-huh.
and, wanted to move back to the DC area, where I'm from.
Uh-huh.
And I also, the patriarch was getting on in years and less interested in investing in illiquid assets. And I was feeling a little bit of the itch to really do my own thing. So we, amicably parted ways, and I stayed on for a period of time to help them kind of wind down some of the assets and get in a good place, while I was in a position where I wanted to start putting my own capital to work and really testing out this thesis, this dual use investment thesis. And so left California in mid 2019, back to DC, and really started Marlinspike in 2020, right in the middle of COVID, as a matter of fact.
Great timing.
Yeah, usually, hopefully when I look back, it'll be great timing, because I think a lot of unbelievable companies were started in times of distress.
No, I totally get
So,
it, but
so far, so good. Still in business 4 years
it,
later.
something new. But it's pretty gutsy to form your own venture investing firm in the middle of a pandemic, not knowing what to do. And I mean, really, the first venture firm you've worked at. I mean, family offices are family offices, and undoubtedly there's similarities, but pretty gutsy move.
Well, gutsy or crazy or whatever you want to call it. I think I was fortunate in that we started off with this theme, this idea, and a great deal. We had I tied up some stock in Palantir before they went public with a few other partners on this deal, and that was really the one that really launched the whole concept and the whole company. So without having success there, I don't think Marlinspike would be what it is today, or have the legs to become a preeminent aerospace and defense tech investing firm.
And so when you're doing this, did was it just your experience seeing what SpaceX did or what Palantir did that caused you to say, hey, there's room for me to do this dual use stuff? Or did it come from, the Naval Academy and or, even being on ships? How did you ultimately say, hey, there's something here, there's room for me. I'm not going to just be like everybody else. I've got something here. How'd you come to that realization?
So again, evolution, combination of factors. One, on the investment front, seeing that a company like SpaceX could really upend a whole industry. I mean,
Hmm.
what they've been able to do over the last 20, almost 25 years is just remarkable. I mean, they've lowered launch costs by 2/3. They can land rockets. They reuse rockets. I mean, they've got an unbelievable communications platform. They will make it to Mars. I mean, this is just like blow your hair back type of stuff. So they really showed the way that you can be an innovator and become an incredibly valuable and impactful company. And then Palantir, did it right behind them. So the success of Palantir, those two were like, there's really something here. It might be rare, but what else is behind it? So after we did the Palantir transaction, started to see a lot of other interesting companies in aerospace and space, AI, autonomy, cyber. And I was seeing companies that were much earlier, really in the nascent stages, where clearly if you can invest earlier and those companies progress, your return can be much greater. So we just started putting money to work across different companies at different stages. And that's what started to inform this idea of, the most efficient way to put capital to work in this space. And I think the most professional way is to actually have a proper fund. Then you've got, a duration where you can put capital to work steadily over an investment period. You've got management fees so you can build a proper team and incentivize a great team with carried interest as well. When we all succeed and the companies succeed, everyone can succeed. And I thought there was enough of an investment universe and enough great companies out there where we wouldn't be stretching to do deals into companies that I didn't think were going to be, meaningful, or at least have a really good chance at a great return and being an impactful company.
And so, I want to talk about that in a sec before we start to really unpack aerospace, space, defense, and all kinds of dual use stuff. But I think the thing I've noticed about boutique funds, newer funds, at some point they have the luxury of not just having to deploy money, because they don't necessarily seek out investors that are like, you better get me a return in 5 years or else. And you can be more careful, both in terms of who your investors are and what your investments are. So I'm sure that you've experienced that and you've seen, hey, we're going to be cautious in what we do. We're not just going to deploy money because one of our quote, anchor investors is like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And, that is, I guess, at one sense, the beauty of not being a mega fund and not having, there's, as you know, in the industry, there's an inevitable tension between the management and the investors. And often now, the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. But what do you do when you're management and you have tremendous pressure on you to make investments, which some of them maybe, if there was less pressure, they'd be a little bit more cautious. I think you benefit from being in a position where you can be a little bit more selective and you can talk to your investors and say, hey, look, kind of want to get this right.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that for most emerging managers and broadly defined, funds one, two, or three, anywhere from 10, $20 million in AUM up to 2 billion. That's kind of the defined universe. I mean, these are managers like me and our team that put a lot on the line. I mean, we're putting our careers, our reputation, the vast portion of our capital at risk, and we got to get it right. And if you don't put up good returns on fund one, or the promise of good returns, or you haven't had success doing a few deals beforehand, you're not going to get a fund two. And you really don't get scale in this business until you hit your kind of fund three. Now your fund one is kicking out, steady returns and showing success. And that's how you end up building, a really strong alternative asset management business. But you got to get it right. And you've got to be very selective, very judicious, in really everything, in terms of your partners, in terms of the companies you pick, in terms of how you build your portfolio, how much you put in each company, where you spend your time. I mean, I think you asked earlier about, what I've learned, that running a fund or running an alternative investment management firm, that is a business and an art unto itself. There's a lot of complexity that goes with it. And there's a reason why a lot of big institutional investors won't invest in emerging managers, and they'll wait till you're on fund three or fund four and you've had a lot of success and they can point to a repeatable process. Now, returns might diminish in later funds, but they believe their risk goes down. So I really love these investors that understand the risk reward trade-off with a hungry yet skillful manager, because typically the biggest returns are going to be in the earliest funds when the managers are very hungry to put up the best returns.
That makes sense. So when you look at companies that are really core companies for you, tell us a little bit about the diligence process, like what it is that you do to figure out whether you want to be an investor.
Sure. So we start off first and foremost, do they have dual use capabilities? So it doesn't necessarily mean that day one they've got a revenue split 50-50 defense intelligence community and then commercial. they might, and they often do start in one area or the other, but we
Mhm.
like to look at technology and think about where else we can take that technology and where they can grow and where they can scale. And typically we do that because the commercial side or the total addressable market, it generally dwarfs what can be on the Department of Defense or the intelligence community side. So that's a big thing we look for after we assess, okay, can this actually be a really meaningful company and achieve scale in the dual use world? If that's a yes, then it's okay. The team, the technology, and again, an assessment of the total addressable markets. So the team is very, very important, especially in the earlier stages. We want to back founders that really know what they're doing, have had a history of success. The tech obviously has got to be something interesting, differentiated, solving problems that need to be solved, and then the addressable market has got to be big enough where we think they can hit some levels of scale, so we can get a great return.
That makes sense. And of course, I mean, it's just prudent that the commercial applications are maybe not as subject to political winds, and also much easier to deal with in terms of much broader customer base for whomever is using the end product of your target investment company. Whereas, well, we need a lot of military technology. We all know that, but it's not always as predictable. And
No, you're right, and I think that also informs, where we invest. So in addition to what I mentioned before, we're looking for 4 primary sectors: aerospace and space, AI, autonomous systems, and cyber. And these also happen to be sectors that, while there's a lot of need for these sectors in defense and the intelligence community, there's huge growth opportunities in markets on the commercial side. So there's a nice overlap in those areas. And frankly, these are areas that we're not inventing. So these are markets that already exist. In some cases, they're already very large, and they're all growing nicely or have niches within them that are growing nicely.
thanks for tuning in. If you want more info on the show, please visit blockandtackleshow.com. And you can also email me at Karl at blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.